large number of people, especially the young generation, who voted in favour of remaining in the European Union. Resolving those contradictions so as to minimise damage to our citizens must be the objective of the negotiations to come. And if we want common sense and the general interest to prevail, we must ignore those who shout and posture. And I agree with you, Mrs. May, when you say you want to build a stronger, fairer, better Britain. Achieving stronger, fairer and better societies is a goal that many share in this chamber. Delivering this requires us to face the Trumps and the Putins of this world, to tackle climate change, to fight terrorism and organised crime, to find common responses to the global migration challenge, to curb corporate power. And who can believe? Who seriously can believe when EU citizens altogether represent 7% of the global population on 2% of the land, that any, I say any, of our member states, including the largest, is better equipped to face these challenges on its own? Mrs. May, like it or not, we're in this together. Taking back control, being recognised as global players, requires all Europeans, including Britons, to act together. There's no such thing as absolute sovereignty. In the 21st century, we can only reconquer sovereignty for democracies by sharing it. Mrs. May, you want to build a Britain your children and grandchildren are proud to call home. Let me remind you that as we speak, many of your own citizens are proud to call not just Britain, but Europe home. Let us not let them down. Thank you very much.
Per il gruppo.
On behalf of the EFDD group, the floor goes to Mr. Farage.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it may have taken 9 months, a pretty full gestation, but be in no doubt that last Wednesday was a great historic day when the United Kingdom announced that we were going to become an independent, self-governing, democratic nation once again, an act that has been cheered by hundreds of millions of people all over the world. Now, we've had a little history lesson this morning from Mr. Verhofstadt, but he made one mistake. In 1973, sir, we did not join the European Union. We joined the European Economic Community. And had the British people known that it was intended to get political and take away our ability to govern ourselves, we never would. Now, I'm sorry to say that the response to the triggering of Article 50 has been all too predictable. Already you've made a series of demands that are not just unreasonable, but in some cases clearly impossible for Britain to comply with. You began by telling us that we have to pay a bill, a cool 52 billion sterling, a figure that has clearly been plucked out of the air, effectively a form of ransom demand. What you could have acknowledged is that we've put net over 200 billion sterling into this project. We're actually shareholders in this building and the rest of the assets, and really, you should be making us an offer we can't refuse to go. And the ever-charming Mr. Verhofstadt, the Parliament's chief negotiator, in his resolution that we're to vote on later today, tells us that we cannot discuss potential trade deals with anybody else in the world until we've left the European Union. That has no basis in treaty law whatsoever. And it's rather like saying you can't guarantee yourself a dwelling for when you leave prison, and I trust the British government will completely ignore you. And of course, Mr. Tusk, who is not with us today, I suspect that he's still crying. He looked pretty tearful, didn't he, after the British ambassador delivered the letter last week. He tells us in his memorandum that any future trade deal must ensure that the United Kingdom is not allowed to have a competitive advantage. This is all impossible, and you add to that You add to that the hypocrisy of, on the one hand, saying the EU will negotiate as one, and clause 22 of the Tusk document saying that actually Gibraltar, that the Spanish can have a total veto over the whole trade deal if they're not happy with the sovereignty of Gibraltar. We believe in national self-determination. Your aim and ambition is to destroy nation-state democracy. Gibraltar is clearly a deal-breaker on current terms. You have shown yourselves with these demands to be vindictive, to be nasty. All I can say is thank goodness we're leaving. You're behaving like the mafia. You think we're a hostage. We're not. We're free to go. We're free to go. And 85, and now I do understand.
Onorevole Farage.
I do understand.
Onorevole Farage.
Sorry, Mr. Farage. Listen, I'm trying to give you the chance to speak and say everything you want to say. But if you're talking about the mafia, you're saying this Parliament is behaving like the mafia. As far as I'm concerned, that's unacceptable.
I do understand. I do understand, sir, Mr. President. I do understand national sensitivities. I'll change it to gangsters. All right? And that is how we're being treated. We're being given a ransom note. But what must be very difficult for all of you to get into your minds is there is a bigger world out there than the European Union. 85% of the global economy is outside the European Union. And if you wish to have no deal, if you wish to force us to walk away from the table, it is not us that will be hurt. Do you know, we don't have to buy German motor cars. We don't have to drink French wine. We don't have to eat Belgian chocolate. There are a lot of other people that will give that to us. A return to tariffs will risk the jobs of hundreds of thousands of people living in the European Union, and yet what you're saying is you want to put the interests of the European Union above that of your citizens and your companies. And if you continue with that route, it won't just be the United Kingdom that triggers Article 50, there'll be many more to come.
Per il gruppo Europa delle
On behalf of the Europe of Nations and Freedoms Group, Mr. de Graaf.
Mr. President, I send my congratulations to Ms. Theresa May, to the United Kingdom and the British people. And I say to them, you have regained your freedom and your sovereignty by invoking Article 50, by leaving the European Union. You have now regained the opportunity to flourish as a nation, to control your borders, to make your own laws, to make your own trade deals. The bureaucrats from the EU will try to make you pay about 60 billion. They'll try to force you to comply with all EU directives and standards, and to accept hundreds of thousands of migrants, to accept even the rulings of the European Court of Justice. They will try to open an Ireland road for migrants to the UK. I say to you, don't give in to these demands. You're far better off outside the EU, a union which is going the way of more and more isolation. And they are calling you friend here, friend. But they want to punish you and make you bleed. Let me therefore remind you of the famous words of Sir Winston Churchill. We shall defend our island, whatever the costs may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. God bless the United Kingdom.
La parola all'onorevole.
The floor goes to Mr. Wolf on behalf of the non-attached members.
Thank you, Mr. President. As Brexit negotiations begin, it is a joy to watch the towering masters in the art of EU diplomacy in full flow here today. Those like Mr. Weber, whose bellicose, threatening and theatrical words no doubt entertain this chamber, but are like a pen with no point in the negotiating rooms. He said on his recent tour of the British media that politicians who fought for Brexit were allowed to grow up in a free Europe, and that the UK should now pay more. Well, Mr Weber, may I remind you that the freedom that you say you promote came at a mighty cost to Britain. It came in the blood and sacrifice of millions of Britons, those who, like my grandfather, when asked, unhesitatingly fought in the sands of Africa so Europe can be free. It came in the 120 billion it cost Britain to fight a German dictator. It came in the 5 trillion Britain contributed to NATO to help build a shield of freedom around Europe from communism. It came on the 500 billion or more we have contributed to the EU and the billions more we spend each